You made it.
Yeah. Hey. So this is the Drupal usability meeting for January 8th, 2019. I have this new radio voice. Hopefully I will get over it soon. And we have a whole bunch of topics for today. So I believe Angie wanted to bring an issue that we may get to later. And Ted brought two issues, and Benji brought one issue, and Vicky had an issue, but she's not here, so we may talk about it, but we'll not have the context from her. So I think let's start with the topics of the people who are here. Benji, you want to start since you have your screen already here?
Okay, sure. So what am I looking at? It's issue 1953568. Make the bundle settings for entity reference fields more visible. And let's see, I have 2 copies of Drupal 8 currently running with the Mommy install profile. This is the one without the patch. Let me see. So let me start from scratch and delete the field that I added. So it's a question about the user experience on the page for adding and configuring an entity reference field. For example, a taxonomy reference field. So, reference. So that's the first screen for adding a new field. The second just gives us whether we want limited or unlimited, and it's limited how many values. And then the question is this third screen, and you'll see that I have to scroll to get to this key area at the bottom, the field set, where I get to choose which vocabularies I'm applying with this term reference. And the I think most people commenting on the issue agree that it is it would be more intuitive if this appeared nearer the top, if we could choose our categories a little earlier in the process, before talking about default value, whether it's required, and what the help text is. So there was some discussion on the issue. There was an earlier patch. I think that I haven't looked at the code closely, but I think the earlier patch would have made a change that applied to all different sorts of fields. The current patch applies only to configuration forms for entity reference fields. And I think all it does is move this field set up closer to the top. There's a comment on the issue from Jess from XJM saying that the widget for the default value is affected by the choices you make down here in the reference type. And that comment is a few years old. In my testing, that was not the case. The only way I could get this field to change, it's currently an autocomplete field. The only way I could get it to change was by creating the field, managing the form display, changing the form display to something other than an autocomplete, and then coming back to edit the field.
She may have meant that, so if you have a term, the default value, right? And you want it to be the default, so I guess recipe category of desserts. And your default value is, oh, I guess, yeah, your default value is desserts, right? recipe category. If you uncheck recipe category and just do tags, then that's not a valid. Well, now just do click tags.
I'm sorry?
Click tags as the type.
I agree that's the way it should work. I think it's broken based on my experimentation last night.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm comfortable with saying it doesn't work that way. It's one of the problems with default values. It's not dynamic. It's set when the page renders. So if you hit save, I think it'll now limit itself to tag. If you came back to the default value, it'll be limited to tags, but not right now.
Okay.
And we could test that and see.
Sure.
Well, I think if we fixed that, then we would want those two things next to each other, I'm assuming. Whereas if it cleared it out, right, because it wasn't a good value anymore, if that was now not next, if that was now the reference type was at the top of the page and you actually didn't notice that the default value had changed, then that would be bad.
I think in this particular example, if you look, initially there were two desserts because one came from each vocabulary. And within the default value, you can't actually determine which term goes with which vocabulary.
Yeah.
So that's another behavioral problem.
Ooh, it looks like the autocomplete is cached because dessert still shows up, but accompaniment does not. Anyway.
I thought there were two desserts, one in each vocabulary.
Anyway, that's out of scope.
Well, it's out of scope in the sense that the bug is out of scope, but it's not out of scope in that if the intention is that when you say switch the available bundles, then the default value should reset itself if it's no longer valid. Then if you moved it up to the top and say you couldn't see the default value, when you changed the reference type, then I guess those two things I could see why she might want them. Why XGM might have commented that they should be next to each other.
Actually, her comment wasn't about them being next to each other. There was a lot of discussion about this, the reference method, which can be either default or choose from the view. There was a lot of discussion about whether that should be hidden or whether people almost never use it, so let's move it to the bottom. And most everyone agreed, including when we discussed it in the UX usability meeting a little over a year ago, that it's a bad idea to have this reference method down below the things that it affects, because this does change the things that are currently below it. Once you say I want the reference method to be from the view, the next options are entirely different than if it's the default reference method. So everyone was agreeing that no, it's a bad idea to move this below the options it affects. And XJM pointed out that it also affects this default value, which is currently above it.
Yeah. So do you have the patched version? Yeah.
So over here, if you look closely enough in the URL, you'll see this is a different copy of the site. I could delete and start over again if you like. You can see I've already changed the widget so that it is a drop-down list rather than autocomplete. But anyway, the label has changed. It's now reference options instead of reference type. And other than that change in wording, I think the only difference is that it has been moved up here.
The drop-down list for default value doesn't work for large vocabularies.
Yeah, no, it doesn't, and that's just something that I set while experimenting. That's not in the code.
Got it.
So from a form UX, I personally have an issue when you have a details element, then inline I'm just going to call them inline elements without a container, and then another details element. It's like that's an awkward to me layout for forms.
So for instance, reference options, then help text is inline and required field is inline, and then there's another field set.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like I've struggled with, like, you know, web forms got like crazy numbers of forms. And I struggled with this, and I just decided that everything should be in a container. That solves a little bit of the layout issue. And then the other concept is that field sets should be first, you know, like the stuff that someone's going to always enter would be first. I don't.
So going back to the unpatched.
Yeah.
So we have both field sets are at the bottom of the page.
Which makes it
A little better.
A little better. So maybe the help, like maybe we really just need to switch the position. I mean, the most MVP solution is switch the position between the reference type and default value, and leave help text where it is. And that is a lot more predictable for people who are navigating around through fields, because every field has label and help text and required. So they expect it in that position, being one of the first three elements.
Does not every field have a default value?
They do, but the position of the default value in the reference type, I'm looking around at fields, and very few fields have a second. Let's call reference types as a second field set, like a settings, a field specific settings, details element. Sorry to confuse the nomenclature. So that doesn't throw people off if we switch the order from reference type comes before default value. I don't think people will be thrown off by that.
So the other consideration is that these are required settings. You have to choose a reference method, which comes with a default, so you could skip it. But then the vocabulary by default, nothing has been selected. And I guess it depends on what sort of entity you're referencing. If you select a node reference and there's more than one content type, if you select term reference and there's more than one vocabulary, if you select a media reference and there's more than one media type. So in most of the cases, something has to be selected. There's a separate issue out there to make it so that not selecting anything is the same as selecting everything. But the way it currently works, if that is below the fold and you try to save, you get the error message because there's a required field that hasn't been filled out.
I guess my only concern would be with the, can you switch back to the patch version again?
Sure.
Thanks. Yeah, like Jacob was saying, that if help text isn't where it is on every other field, that's a little confusing. And I don't know, it just seems like help text, I don't know, maybe people don't use it, but it seems like promoting it to the very top is a good thing because people should use it. I don't know.
Is there an implied linkage between the reference method of default and then the term default value? Because I know they are two different things, but because of their proximity to one another, it can be almost implied when you look at it that there's some sort of relationship between the two.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a bug currently, but part of the relationship is the reference options should affect the available default values. They might not, but they should, because you should not be able to set a default value that doesn't match that doesn't work with your reference options.
Well, if you follow, oh, sorry.
Go. I'll weigh in after.
If you follow the default approach that Views uses when creating filters, in a view, the filters are automatically all it says all, and then it selects everything beneath it when you first look at a filter when you externalize it. So maybe using the pattern that Views uses here would make sense. And then if you changed it to just specific vocabularies, it would deselect all. And then you could pick which ones you wanted specifically, and then that would repopulate the default value if it was below it. And that would be a more reasonable behavior that would follow what everyone seems to be saying.
So I still think that's out of scope for the current issue.
Yeah, I also agree. I think it's out of scope. I do see a bigger issue with the field UI. Can you create a link field? Because that has another similar example of a similar UX experience.
Okay, let me field. This is patched version, but it shouldn't make any difference.
No, it won't make any difference. It'll just show you allowed link
Anyway.
type and allowed link text.
Okay.
Link.
Okay, so label, help, required, default value are in the same order that we saw earlier.
And then I'm going to call these dangling form elements. You know, like allowed link type and allowed link text are kind of below default value, even though they do affect the default value on what's optional and what's required. And I mean, if you look at this, they really, I mean, I think the UX issue here is that any settings related to a field should be in a container, which is a details element, and should be very matter of fact, where the container just says link settings. And then that should be first, because like when someone's setting up a link type, this is more important than the default value. Most people will adjust these two fields over the default value, and they're dangling at the bottom. And when you look at this, you look at the entity reference, you kind of see that, yes, default value should be the last thing that most people, that's the last thing they're entering.
So you're suggesting, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, or just not entering. There's a lot of fields you just don't want a default value.
Yeah, most would we argue most fields you don't care about a default value. I mean, that's why it's good. It's a details element, you know, because it can be collapsed. It kind of hints that it's not that important.
So Jacob, you're recommending, and this is sort of a change in scope, but still appropriate for the current issue, that one, we make a change for all field types, not just entity references. Two, that we put any field specific settings inside a details element. And three, that we put that details element before the default value. Is that about right?
Yes, and the fourth is that we come up with a standard naming convention for that. I mean, I argue that it should be link settings, you know, like the field type, the name of the field, settings. So in the case of entity reference, it wouldn't be selection method, it would be entity reference settings. And we could change that, but if you standardize it, it makes it a lot more predictable for someone, because they're like, I created an entity reference, and now here are the entity reference settings. Not entity like reference type doesn't mean that much to me. It's entity reference settings, kind of the same thing. They're interchangeable. It should be almost a universal nomenclature for all field settings. Field specific settings. Let's get that right. Field type specific settings. Sorry.
You're not suggesting that as the interface text.
I am, but I'm open to suggestions, but I think it should be universal. Like when you're entering field specific settings, there should be a common labeling for field specific settings.
Right. But the label should not be literally field type. It should be link specific settings or
configuration. Yeah. Settings, configuration. I'm not sure. I think I went with settings a lot of the time when I was dealing with this problem, where I was just like, yeah, call it settings. That's hard. By the way, like scroll to the top, and that's why settings has a problem, because you have field settings, and we could debate that little detail.
I kind of like that suggestion. I mean, it does feel sort of wrong on the current patch, and I think Marcos sort of apologizes for the way he's doing it with the form alter. It's sort of admitting, oh, we didn't think this through carefully in general, so we're going to make this this change just for entity references. And I kind of like the approach that is more consistent across field types. And as you said earlier, this would be the MVP for this issue, just to move it above the default value.
Yeah. It's very challenging. Like, yeah, I mean, so like I'm dealing with this in web form, and the approach I took, just to kind of give you where I'm coming from with this, is I created field set. Like my concept was you put field sets first. So you got your field settings, which what we're looking at right now is label, help text, and required. Like that's every field has that. And then below field settings, you have field type settings, which in this case, what we're looking at right now would be link settings. I also, for field type specific settings, I used a field set because I felt like that should always be open, because if we have these settings here, like entity reference and link have these two, these settings, everyone needs to enter them. Everyone needs to be aware of them and look at them. And then the remaining ones, like default value, I did in the details, and I collapsed it because I didn't think it was that important. It kind of, the reason breaking up to field sets and details is field sets are like, okay, you got to enter this. This is important information. And default value I mean, I'll just throw it, like, this is getting into out of scope, but having it collapse, most people don't need to enter it. What do people think? Let's move it ahead.
Well, so where does that bring us back for this particular issue? I mean, is the idea to tackle just reordering this one field and move it to where the patch is now, or move it below, just above default value? Just
above default value. For this specific issue, move it above default value and make a suggestion on the labeling that might be applicable to all field types.
That makes sense.
I think I like that. I'm willing to change the issue description and add a comment along those lines.
Okay, so for the label, there's just this issue. I've ran into this issue in course. Like, what are quote settings and what are quote configuration? I think settings is probably the right label. There's the argument that it's a little confusing because we have field settings. Not so much. I mean, if you think of it this way, if you say entity reference setting, that means field type settings. So it does make sense. Does anybody have any other thoughts about like entity reference setting?
I mean, my thought would be, how long has the issue been open? And if we bring in the label issue, is it going to be another 2 times whatever? Like, because Benji, didn't you say you commented on this issue 6 months ago?
No, more like 13 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like pulling the. I guess let's look at the patch version again.
Patch version again. That's this one for links here.
Like, does moving it require the label change?
I agree with you, Ted. Don't change the label. Like, no, you're right. Like, let's get the ticket done, and we're discussing this, and it'll come up again. And at some point, we can kind of go through and maybe clean up all the fields.
I'm not sure I agree. If we're So currently, comparing entity reference to link fields, it seems that the field type is just adding its own form elements, and sometimes they're inline, so to speak, as for the link field, and sometimes they're in a details element, or they might be in a field group. And if we're going to standardize that, then we also have to standardize the title of the details or field group.
Yeah, but is the thought to standardize that right now?
Yes.
In this issue?
Well, we are going to be making a change from no field set, no details element at all on the link fields. We're going to change that to make it either a field set or details element. When we make that change, we have to give it some sort of title.
Yeah, but that's not what this issue is about.
Yeah, that's what Ted's pointing out. It's not what the issue is.
I mean, I guess if moving it would cause the problem that it really doesn't make sense because now it looks different than all of the fields, then yeah, I feel like, yeah, you can't move it without addressing a larger issue. But if moving it doesn't make that problem worse, and it makes whatever the reason people want to move it actually get fixed, then it seems like just tackle this one thing and that one issue. Otherwise, there's a lot of problems probably in general we could tackle with the whole field configuration system.
Well, if we do that, then we're doing it the way the current patch currently does it, which is with a form alter. And then when we come back...
I don't think you have to, though. I'd have to look at the patch, but I don't know why they couldn't have just put wait to move it.
Wait, but Ted, let's talk about, okay, we're going to get a little technical,
yeah.
But the default value, I think, I'll argue that a very simple statement is the default value on all form elements should be the last thing. By the way, even if, go back to the link type. I just want to show you the link type. The UX is better if default value is last. Just to be, because I brought up that whole UX experience, ready? Inline, 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 details, inline, inline. If details is last, this is a better UX here. And that's just setting the weight of the default value to like, I don't know what it is, you know, I'm guessing it's -10, you know, like -10 or -20 to push it to the bottom. And what's nice about it's a one-line change, and it does set a guideline for people that default value should be last.
Well, default value, if you change the weight on default value, that's done at a higher level than all the other widgets. So, I mean, you could do that to where you just move the default value down and it affects every single widget all at once.
Yeah, that I would argue like that's like to me that's like a one-line change, easy to write a change record. People that are creating custom fields, they'll get it, and I don't think it'll disrupt anyone. I think it'll.
Yeah, I mean visually it'd be the same as what we were talking about before. If like that. Putting the default value at the bottom would make entity reference field look like we were talking about making it look.
So also just for a time check, we spent half of our meeting time on this, so we may want to move on.
Yep.
Okay, so for this issue, recommend just changing the weight of the default value details element and create a separate issue with the suggestions that Jacob made earlier.
Yeah. What's the issue? Can you post the issue number in Slack so I'll keep track of it?
Yeah. Actually, it's already in Slack. I'll also post it in the chat. It's in a thread.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Can we move on to Vika's topic since she arrived in the meantime? She's usually not here and posted the issue earlier last year in our Slack. Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi. So what do you want me to do?
So people usually present their issue, what they suggest changing from to, etc. What are the problems, what they need feedback on. And then we try to provide our best feedback.
Okay. I've got it up somewhere. And I can't find it. Goodness gracious. Too many windows open.
So yours is 293-6365.
I just pasted it into the chat.
Also in Google Chat.
Thanks.
Here.
I'm looking for how to share my screen. I don't see how to do that. That's a shame.
Near the upper left corner of the Google Hangout window, there's a green button.
Oh, got you.
It only appears when you hover.
Okay. There we go. Bingo. How do I know if it's working?
It's working.
Okay, so you see what will be upgraded.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool. So the form hasn't changed a whole lot. What has changed is the part about what will not be upgraded. For example, block here now has block, comma, block content, comma, content translation. That part is new. Used to just say will not be upgraded. But the user now has a sense that the upgrade of the D7 block actually goes to 3 different places in Drupal 8. Hopefully that helps them make a decision about what to do if it appears up here where it says it will not be upgraded. Somewhere in the issue queue for this issue, there's a comment that says that this is begging for some more useful information for the user. Like, okay, my module says it's not going to be upgraded. What do I do next? So they don't panic. Give them someplace to go or something useful to do here. And that's what this is all about.
So you have some text above the table though, which says there are no modules installed on your new site to replace these modules. So does that sufficiently explain that you are missing these Drupal 8 modules? Do you suggest that we tweak the text or to change the UI in a different way?
There's a whole bunch of things that'll happen if you see this here. You know, you have to ask yourself, do I really need block or do I really need color? Do I need content translation? And some people won't know those steps to go through. It's probably too much information for this page, but I don't know. I have enough trouble just getting the data on the page for this issue. I can't think about how to make it nice for the user.
So is that something that the review the pre-upgrade analysis page would cover?
Sorry, say it again?
Is that something that the review the pre-upgrade analysis page would cover?
Ah, you mean this page?
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't looked at it in a while. Review the pre-upgrade analysis. So obviously this will need to be updated.
Yeah.
So some screenshots, and then that.
So pretend for a second that we had no screenshots. Can you like refresh us on the problem? So the problem is that some Drupal 6 or 7 modules on your site will not have an equivalent Drupal 8 migration path. And the migration is able to flag them and say, hey, color modules variables that are set somewhere have nowhere to go.
Mhm.
And they're able to raise that to the user, which I think is a huge step in the right direction, because the alternative is basically sifting through database tables trying to figure out what went where, right?
Mhm.
So that's great. So the problem, though, is that, okay, this is great that I have this list of block content, migrate status, and complete test, but I don't know what to do.
That's right.
So
Very
what
succinct.
would you do? Like eliminating the idea of a UI from this altogether, what would you do as you, Vicky, migrate extraordinaire, if you're on a site and it's got this problem?
I'd go ask somebody who knows more about the site requirements. I'd ask people who know those modules. Yes, so first you need to know your site requirements.
Because what I would probably do is halt the migration entirely.
Yep.
Like if I try to run update.php and I get any errors, I will stop and I won't do anything, so I can rectify that. But some of these are not rectifiable, right? Like there is no color module migration, period.
Actually, there are for some settings.
Oh, that's good.
But yes, some will have no answer. That's right. There is no upgrade. Yeah.
Is there any way for a module to mark itself as like, don't worry about me, my data doesn't need to be upgraded, or not really, because that's a very site-specific decision?
Actually, that's the main reason for this issue, is that we want to allow modules to be able to declare their migration status. A way to say, I've got migrations and I'm not finished. The default is if there's no migrations, we're going to assume it won't be upgraded, I think.
Yeah, I think you have to, because you're introducing a new API or something to allow people to.
Yeah.
So in absence of that, you have to assume that it's wrong, unless you have some programmatic way of figuring that out. Like, how do things get on the green list?
It's very complicated and probably not worth going into at the moment, because it's very complicated and I haven't looked at it in a while.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough.
But I think we can at least
I'd rather
say,
focus on what the user wants to see here. What does the user want here, and what do I need to do to get it on the page for them?
In any error message situation, you want to know what happened, ideally with a unique type of message that you can Google to go find other people who had that same problem. What are the next concrete steps you can take to fix the problem? And I think that's where we're running into an issue, is that the concrete steps are going to vary from module to module, right?
Yes, that's correct.
The color module, maybe it doesn't matter because you don't give a fuck about color module. Maybe you only used color module because that one time you were playing around with Bartik and we're like, huh, interesting, and then never looked at it again.
That's right.
But maybe for date module, it's a huge deal because that means all your events are going to come through with no start times or whatever. So I guess, given that there's a lot of nuance here, we probably would link to a documentation page, kind of like what you're showing here, you know, where it's like,
so this is where the nuances are explained.
Yeah, because this is not, the nuances here are not going to fit in an error message at all.
Right.
But I guess what we don't have, and not necessarily that we need this, but like ideally, I'm just talking, so this isn't like Angie, the product manager, making requirements. But if I were doing this migration, I would be like, okay, shut up about the color module thing. There'd be a way for me to mark that as like, I know about it and it's fine. So it wouldn't harass me about that again. And then I could start to whittle that list down to only the errors that actually matter to my site. But I feel like that's a whole complicated mess in terms of extra code we'd have to add. I mean, I don't know. Maybe what you have is fine. Can you, Benji, I think, the screen.
Put it this way, I cringed when you said that. It's a really good idea, but I cringed.
What? Yeah, no. I know. That's why I was saying I'm just talking out loud. This is not a mandate or anything like that. Benji, on your screenshot, can you flip back to
What?
something?
I'm just looking at the screenshots attached to the issue. Do you want any of these?
That's the old one.
So when you click, yeah, okay, this one I think, because when you click modules that will not be upgraded, this is what you're taken to, right? So there are no modules installed on your site to replace these modules. If you proceed with the upgrade now configuration or content modules, presumably it says something like will not be upgraded, or I can't.
Something like that.
Yeah.
All I have is a screenshot.
No, I know. I'm just, yeah. And then for more information, consult the Upgrading to Drupal 8 handbook, I guess is what it probably says.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, that's probably the best thing you can do at this point.
Okay.
I think surfacing the ones that are not going to get upgraded is huge. As if I recall, originally it did not do that, right?
It would just say it will not be upgraded or not upgraded, something very basic.
Yeah.
But at least now you know the destination module or modules.
And if you have an API of some kind, here's maybe a way to address what I was saying. Because a migrate usually requires some programming chops anyway. But there's some kind of an API where modules can declare themselves as like, just ignore me, I'm fine, don't flag me as an error. Like that's something that you're introducing here. So if there's a way for me as a site owner to do that myself on modules that don't self-declare that way, that maybe solves the problem. So a YAML file or something where I can like migrate.ignore.yaml or something, you know what I mean? And I can start adding modules that I already know of to it. And they just get the green checkbox and I can completely factor them out of my, life. That would be a low-key way of doing what I was talking about, since checkboxes and shit sounds like horrible.
I'm confused about not the screenshot on my screen, but the screenshot that is it Vicky is showing us. So field is not going to be upgraded, and then under the Drupal 8 column it says field. Well, what does that mean?
That's confusing.
On the Drupal 7 side, it's the module field, and on the Drupal 8 side, it's the destination module.
So does this mean that the field module will not be upgraded, but that's just because you somehow disabled the field module on your Drupal 8 site, and you can fix it by enabling that module?
That's correct. That's the most likely scenario, yes.
Okay, so that answers one of the big objections that Angie mentioned, which is that we're not telling people what to do about it. Well, we really are telling them what to do about it, just not very clearly. There has to be some interface text here saying, go ahead and enable these modules in the second column. And suddenly you'll move from the not upgraded section to the upgraded section.
Okay, and where does one put that information on the page?
Probably in the text at the top of the table, right underneath modules that will not be upgraded.
So they may want to enable those modules, or they may intentionally disable them because they don't want those things to be migrated, or maybe I don't know.
So I'm hearing a suggestion to change the sentence underneath modules that will not be upgraded to include the most common thing to do is to enable the modules. However, you still want to consult this other page for more information, more details.
No.
I don't know.
Seems reasonable to me.
Okay. Any objections to that?
Sorry, can you repeat? kind of a multitasking situation happening over here.
I heard a suggestion.
Sorry.
Oh, I heard a suggestion to add a phrase or sentence to that top part under modules that will not be upgraded, to say that the most common thing to do here is to enable those Drupal 8 modules and reload the page, essentially, or restart, but still point to the more information.
That's fine. Can the computer not just do that? Like if you find a module, like the migrate script, this page, whatever, if migrate finds a module on the file system that matches the name of the target module, can it not just enable it itself? Or I guess not, because that would, like, ideally how that would manifest itself is it would kind of like when you enable a module, right? And it tells you, hey, if you turn on forum module, it's also going to turn on taxonomy and node module because those are requirements. And you say, yeah, whatever, click. So ideally, that would be how this would be handled. It would be like, you have Drupal 7 modules that have Drupal 8 modules with migrations available, but they are not currently enabled. So if you click this button, it's going to enable them for you. Are you cool with that? And you say yes.
Yeah.
That would be the ideal thing.
Yep.
That is not too hard to do because I'm trying to picture how I would do this. For one thing, you're showing me the machine names of these modules, which may not map to the human readable names, which is what I'll see in the modules list. So I'm like got two browser windows open. And in the second one, I'm like trying to find content _ translation. Like these are pretty good because fortunately they match. But, you know, something like automatic node titles is actually node, and there's some weird ones out there. So the ideal thing would be that since the computer is somehow smart enough to know the target module, and I know it can do like a system list or whatever the fuck the function is called these days. I never remember that, but like, it's smart enough to be able to check that. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're using the version of the module that has the migration path that's available and a bunch of other things, but at least that's a pretty simple thing to automate that we could do for people. And just give them a confirmation form because maybe they don't want their custom module enabled because they are in the middle of porting it. It's going to fatal error their whole site or something like that. But if that is genuinely the most common thing that you would do here, then let's just do it for them, I would say. So that the only reason they're getting this error is because it's something sticky that requires human intervention. How hard is it to do?
I don't know how hard it is. I would prefer to do that in a follow-up issue, though, because this patch is already very big because of the changes under the hood that are going on.
It seems like this is already going to be a step forward from where we are, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so. You did mention one thing in there that this is showing machine names. Does anyone recommend we change that to the module name? Or stay with the machine name?
My preference is to stick with the machine name, unless you can show both.
Both, I think, would be great. I agree the machine name is really helpful here, but it is not, because this is a user interface, we don't frequently refer to the modules by their machine names. So the ideal thing, I think, would be both if it's possible. But that'll also clutterize this quite a bit because it'd be like aggregator, block, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think the machine name is necessary because sometimes resolving this is going to literally involve trawling through module code to figure out what the fuck's going on. And then you really actually do need the machine name for it. I'm just saying it's a terrible user experience to have to know, like, be able to reconcile from a human being perspective what's shown here and what's shown on the modules page because they're not the same.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, I'm fine with follow-up for that.
Okay. So I've picked up 3 points, was to expand that top sentence. In the future, add a page that will add a method so that the person can enable all the modules. And the machine name, change this to module name versus machine name. But in this issue would be the one about just adding a sentence to say the most common thing is to add to enable modules. Is that agreed?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the simplest thing that can possibly work to get this out the door.
Yes. Yes, we need simple at this stage.
Right. But I would make the priority of those at least the anyway. I would make the priority of the follow-ups at least major, because there's still a lot to do to make this really. I mean, have we user tested this with anyone?
Me?
Okay, you. But
I don't think I count though.
I'm guessing though that, like, let's get this in so it's at least better than it was. But I'm guessing the first time we put like a user who is not on the migration team, shall we put it that way, in front of it, pretty hard. And not due to anything you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you're doing the best you can here, but I feel like it might actually be useful to do that kind of study, because we're sitting here kind of throwing out ideas, but I think the best way to inform this would be to actually take some people through this and, you know, if possible, video what happens and the head smashing and all that. Just like, because they might have that other suggestions might come out of that, if that makes sense.
Hey, go for it. I'd love to see that happen.
Another option, instead of adding more text at the top of the table, if you could say it really clearly and succinctly, it could be added in parentheses after the table header Drupal 8. Like something shorter and clearer than enable this module if you want to.
Oh, I like that. I like it better than changing that sentence, because you'll notice it quicker.
But it's hard to come up with something short and clear enough. One other really minor point on machine name versus the usual module name. If you look at the extend page and you expand any item, it lists the machine name. So the information is there. Yeah,
I quite like the idea of changing this to the module name. I don't know how to find it, but I'll figure it out. Any other comments? And who writes the summary on the issue? Is it me or someone else?
Probably you are the best place to do that.
Okay. That's fine.
And just ping us in Slack when you're done, and we'll have a look and see if we want to add anything.
Okay. All right. Well, then I am finished. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks for coming. So our time's up, and Ted left in the meantime, so we'll definitely not look at Ted's issues. So do we have anything else pressing that we want to look at, or we want to close the meeting and meet next week?
See you next week. Thank you.
In that case, yeah, see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.